I had no support, no guidance, no growth, so how did I become the one everyone now depends on? I spent 19 years being the ghost in every room, the son who was fed and clothed but never actually seen, so nobody was more shocked than me when I became the only person standing between my family and total ruin. It's funny how the people who tell you that you'll never amount to anything are usually the first ones in line to ask for your help once you prove them wrong. My name is Leo, and at 28, I've realized that being ignored is a special kind of trauma, but it's also a hidden superpower. Growing up, I was the middle child in a house that felt more like a waiting room than a home. My father, David, 56, was a man who saved all his passion for his failing hardware store and all his silence for me. My mother, Elena, 54, was obsessed with my older brother, Julian, 31, the star athlete who eventually traded his potential for a drinking habit and a string of bad decisions. I wasn't the athlete, the genius, or the troublemaker. I was just Leo, while Julian got the cheers and the attention, and my younger sister, Sophie, 22, got the coddling. I got the hand-me-downs and the chores. There was no guidance on how to apply for college, no advice on how to navigate the world as a man, and absolutely no growth and courage beyond making sure the grass was mowed. I lived in a vacuum of expectation. By the time I was 16, I had realized that if I wanted to know how anything worked, from car engines to taxes, I had to find the answers myself. I spent my Friday nights in the back corner of the local library or scrolling through technical forums, teaching myself the mechanics of a world that my father was too busy to explain. I was building a mental toolkit in total secrecy, fueled by the quiet realization that no one was coming to save me. Have you ever felt like you were screaming at the top of your lungs in a room full of people, but not a single person turned their head? How do you find your strength when no one taught you how to build it? When I turned 18, I didn't get a party or a car. I got a look from my father that basically asked when I was moving out so he could save on the utility bills. I didn't have a plan because I'd never been told I could have one. I ended up working night shifts at a local warehouse, a place where being a quiet, invisible worker was finally an asset. While Julian was out blowing the family's meager savings on business ventures that were really just excuses to party, I was sitting in the break room, reading every book I could find on logistics, coding, and market investments. I spent 5 years in that warehouse, living in a tiny studio apartment above a noisy garage. My family only called when they needed Julian's bail money or when Sophie needed someone to pay for her textbooks. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't know I was teaching myself how the digital economy actually worked. I was growing in the dark, like a root under a sidewalk, slowly cracking the concrete that everyone assumed would hold me down forever. I started a small side business managing supply chains for local independent retailers who were being crushed by big box stores. It was tedious, unglamorous work that required massive discipline, but it was mine. I didn't tell a soul. I knew that if David and Elena found out I had a cent to my name, it would be absorbed into the black hole of Julian's emergencies. I lived like a monk, saving every penny, while Julian drove a car he couldn't afford and my parents pretended everything was fine. What would you do if you finally started winning, but you knew that sharing your success would mean losing it all to the people who never supported you? As my business grew, I started noticing the red flags in my father's store during my rare visits home. He was buying stock he couldn't sell and ignoring the shift toward online shopping. I tried to warn him once, suggesting he list his specialized inventory on industrial marketplaces, but he just patted me on the shoulder and told me to stick to my warehouse job. He didn't think the invisible son could understand the complexities of real business. I spent my weekends scouting for distressed assets and learning about bankruptcy laws. I knew the storm was coming for my family. I could see the cracks in their foundation from miles away. Julian's investments were becoming more desperate. He was borrowing from people you don't borrow from, and my father's store was bleeding money to competitors who actually understood the internet. I was preparing for a war they didn't even know they were fighting, accumulating the capital and the knowledge that would eventually serve as their only lifeboat. If you saw your family's ship sinking because of their own pride, would you jump in to save them immediately, or wait until they realized they were underwater? The mystery of my family was always how they stayed afloat while doing everything wrong. The reveal came on a Tuesday night 2 years ago. I was 26, finally making a solid living, when I got a frantic call from Sophie. My father's hardware store hadn't just failed, it had been used as collateral for a massive, predatory loan Julian had convinced him to take out for a sure thing investment that turned out to be a total scam. They were losing the house. They were losing the store. Julian had vanished to avoid the creditors, leaving my parents to face the music alone. My parents were sitting in a dark living room because they couldn't even pay the electric bill. They were helpless. For all their years of experience and authority, they were just children who had grown old without learning how to survive a real storm. I walked into that house for the first time in months. My father wouldn't look at me, but this time it wasn't out of indifference, it was out of absolute, crushing shame. My mother was sobbing, clutching a pile of foreclosure notices. They looked at me, the quiet one, the invisible one, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in their eyes. They realized that the son they had neglected was the only one who hadn't fallen apart. I didn't yell. I didn't throw their years of neglect in their faces. I simply sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and took over. I spent the next 18 months working 18-hour days. I used my own hard-earned savings to stall the bank, I restructured the store's entire debt, and I liquidated what little Julian had left behind. I became the accountant, the lawyer, and the backbone of a family that had never given me a shoulder to lean on. The transformation was grueling. I had to teach my father how to use modern systems and my mother how to manage a digital ledger. I had to be the parent to my parents. I fired the lazy staff Julian had hired and replaced them with the automation I'd perfected in my warehouse years. I turned the dusty hardware store into a high-demand online distribution hub for specialized tools that contractors couldn't find anywhere else. The most emotional high wasn't saving the house, it was the moment my father handed me the spare set of keys to the store he never thought I was man enough to run, and walked away, leaving me in charge of the family's future. He finally saw that strength isn't about the noise you make, but the weight you can carry when everyone else lets go. I realized then that my lack of support had been my greatest teacher. Because no one ever helped me, I knew exactly how to help myself. Because I had no guidance, I learned to read the map of the world on my own. I wasn't the one everyone depended on because I was the luckiest, I was the one they depended on because I was the only one who knew what it felt like to have nothing and still keep walking. Today, the store is a thriving niche business, and my parents live in a small, comfortable condo that I own. Julian eventually crawled back, and while I helped him get into a recovery program, I keep him at a distance. They all listen when I speak now, not because I'm the loudest in the room, but because they know that without me, their world stops turning. The biggest lesson I learned is that growth doesn't require a sunny garden and a gardener to prune you. Sometimes, the strongest things grow in the cracks of the sidewalk, where the soil is hard and the water is scarce. I didn't become successful because I had no support. I became successful because the only person I could ever count on was the one in the mirror. Do you think it's possible to truly forgive the people who only value you once you're the one holding the checkbook, or is that relationship permanently changed? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this story spoke to you, please like, share, and subscribe to help us keep telling stories for the ones who grew up in the shadows. See you in the next one.